On the coast of Reykjavik, Iceland, the clock read 6:47 p.m. when the entire sky became red like blood. It was not a sunset. It was not a storm. It was something that made tourists stop in the middle of the street, drivers turn off their cars, and entire families run to their windows with phones trembling in their hands. A young woman recorded and asked, frightened, "Is this normal? Does anyone know what's happening?" Beside her, an elderly Syrian man who had lived in the region for 2 decades watched without blinking and murmured, his voice trembling, "When the sky dresses in that color, it isn't just a phenomenon, it is a sign." The crowd went silent. And the narrator concluded, "Stay with me, because what happened that day had already been described centuries ago, and now the entire world is starting to notice." Before we continue, make sure you're already subscribed and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. The man who witnessed the red sky that night was named Sheikh Adnan Baroud, 82 years old, a Syrian refugee who had lived in Reykjavik for 2 decades. He was known in the neighborhood for his quiet routine, waking before dawn, performing his prayers peacefully, reading pages of the Quran by the window, and walking slowly through the icy streets like someone carrying time on his shoulders. Adnan had a curious habit. He always watched the sky. To him, the firmament speaks, and everything that happens above the clouds carries meaning. In conversations with young Muslims newly arrived in Iceland, he said in his calm voice, "One day the sky will change in a way people won't be able to ignore." Icelandic neighbors smiled politely, thinking he was exaggerating. Some said he had a poetic spirit. Others believed it was just nostalgia for his homeland. Even so, he kept repeating his small warnings, never in a tone of fear, always in a tone of mercy. Sometimes Allah warns before he acts. For years, no one took it seriously. Life went on. Routines, winter, snow, tourism, crowded cafes, children playing in the streets, until the sky that afternoon changed color, and all the conversations that used to be a joke turned into silence, astonishment, and remembrance of the elder's words. What he had said so many times now lingered in the air like a question. What if he had been right from the beginning? The typical Reykjavik cold cut through the air like a blade, but the sky that afternoon seemed calm, almost lazy. Long grey, motionless clouds hovered over the rooftops. The pale winter light illuminated the streets with that soft glow that never becomes a true day. It was an ordinary afternoon, until it wasn't. The first change was subtle. A red streak appeared on the horizon, so thin many thought it was just another sunset reflected by melting snow. Tourists pulled out their phones to take pictures. People walking by commented casually, "Beautiful, isn't it? Must be the reflection from the mountains." Atmospheric stuff. We get these light effects all the time. But it was not that. In minutes, the red stopped being a line and became a stripe, then a stain, then the sky. The color took over half the firmament like paint spilled over glass. It wasn't the usual orange of late afternoon. It was a deep, dense red, almost unsettling, as if carrying an invisible weight. The light reflected on the windows, tinting building facades and giving the snow a blood-stained appearance. It was then that Sheikh Adnan, seated on a bench near Lake Tjörnin, lifted his eyes. He tightened his fingers around his staff, tilted his head slightly, and whispered words no one could hear, but his expression said everything. That was not natural. Because unlike the people filming just for aesthetics, he felt something in the air, a vibration, a shift in the world's breath. The wind stopped for a few seconds. The birds flying over the square fell silent. Even the sound of cars seemed to fade. Adnan murmured, "This is not a sunset." A family walking by was startled by the tone of the old man. "Are you all right, sir?" He answered without taking his eyes off the sky. "What you are seeing is not color. It is a warning." A tourist's camera recorded the exact moment the red light intensified, covering the entire sky like a crimson veil. Those who watched the video later reported the same sensation. The air felt heavier, as if the world were holding its breath before an important announcement. And it was there, in that strange silence, that tension began to grow like a wave about to break. The sky was speaking, but no one knew exactly what would come next. The reddish light that once touched only the horizon now dominated everything around it. Without warning, the glow shifted in intensity, and the sky became a deep red, so dark it looked like liquid spilled over the firmament. The streetlights turned on automatically, as if it were night, even though it was still late afternoon. At that moment, something even stranger happened. The birds, which normally crossed Reykjavik's sky in loose flocks, began flying in chaotic circles, letting out short, distressed cries. Dogs that had been calm on the sidewalks started pulling their leashes and howling upward, agitated. Even the usually indifferent street cats ran under cars and balconies as if they sensed something unusual had descended upon the city. The sound in the square faded little by little, swallowed by a heavy silence so dense it seemed to fill the air. People who had still been filming lowered their phones, looking at each other in growing confusion. It was as if the world around them had muted itself without warning. Sheikh Adnan, now standing and leaning on his staff, watched the sky with complete focus. He did not look frightened. He looked like he recognized something. In a low voice, almost as if speaking only to himself, he murmured ancient passages narrated by the scholars who taught him. When the canopy is tinted like fire, many will remember too late that they had already been warned. A young man beside him swallowed hard. "What do you mean by that? Is this normal?" Adnan responded without taking his eyes off the sky. "Not everything that is natural stops being a warning." The sentence fell over the people like a weight. Suddenly, a woman screamed, "Does anyone know what's happening? This isn't normal." Another pointed at the sky, trembling. "Why is it getting darker? Why are the animals acting like this?" Children began to cry. Tourists ran into cafes. Drivers honked while trying to flee the square. Some neighbors, desperate, shut their windows as if trying to keep something invisible from coming in. And in the middle of that growing chaos, the elder remained steady, staring at the phenomenon, with eyes that held sadness and certainty at the same time. Panic was beginning to spread, and the feeling that the sky was not just color but message became impossible to ignore. The strangeness did not stop at the change of color. Minutes later, videos recorded by residents began circulating through local groups, and in every recording, one detail drew more attention than the red tone. The sky seemed to pulse. It wasn't a gentle shift like a sunset. It was a rhythmic movement, almost as if the light were breathing. The red intensified, faded, then strengthened again, always in the same cadence. Anyone watching the videos felt immediate discomfort, as if there were a consciousness behind that rhythm. In the city center, building lights flickered restlessly. Traffic lights blinked for no reason, street lamps failed in sequence, and windows reflected the red as if covered by a film of fire. Drivers turned off their cars when they noticed their dashboards blinking non-stop, as if the energy had been affected by something coming from above, not below. People whispered, "This isn't a sunset. It can't be. Why is the light beating? It looks like a heart." And while the entire city tried to rationalize what it was seeing, Sheikh Adnan walked slowly toward the center of the square. He planted his staff on the ground and spoke loudly enough for a few nearby to hear. "Signs in the firmament have always been reminders, not to cause fear but to awaken sleeping eyes." A young man holding his phone with trembling hands asked, "But what is this? Some kind of weather phenomenon?" The elder raised his face, watching the wavering red that covered the sky like a living curtain. "A long time ago it was said that when certain colors cover the air without a natural reason, it will be a warning for anyone willing to reflect." The phrase spread an uneasy silence around him. People, even the most skeptical, began looking up not just with fear, but with the feeling that something was trying to communicate. And then, as if responding to everyone's thoughts, the phenomenon changed again. The red light intensified abruptly. For a few seconds it shone so bright that the shadows in the streets disappeared. The city was completely illuminated by an intense, supernatural crimson glow. It was in that instant that the phones captured a detail that would only be noticed hours later. At the highest point in the sky, a cloud formation took on an odd, almost geometric shape, as if someone had drawn lines across the firmament itself. The people standing there didn't realize it immediately, but those who watched the video later had the same reaction. "This can't be a coincidence." The tension grew. The vibration in the air seemed to intensify, and the narrator closes this moment with an inevitable hook. Something else happened in the sky that night, and no one was prepared to see what came next. The phenomenon that night spread as fast as the very light that created it. Before dawn ended, videos were already on meteorological channels, scientific pages, astronomy forums, and local broadcasts. And soon one question began echoing among specialists. What kind of red sky behaves like a pulse? The first opinions came from meteorologists. They analyzed images sent by locals and immediately ruled out the most common hypotheses. "It's not a sunset. The direction of the light is wrong. It isn't a typical solar storm. The intensity doesn't match recorded events. It's not fire reflection. There aren't enough thermal sources in the region. The weather was stable. Humidity didn't justify unusual refraction, and the wind was far too weak to produce the undulating movement of the light. The investigation then moved into another field, frame-by-frame analysis. Laboratories from local universities enlarged every second of the recordings. The result was surprising. The light did not spread randomly. It seemed to follow a pattern, as if something were pushing the brightness from the inside outward. The clouds did not move in the same direction as the light. This detail eliminated the possibility that the phenomenon was merely atmospheric reflection. The pulsation frequency was far too consistent. Experts calculated the cadence, an increase and decrease every few seconds, regular, stable, and strange. Meanwhile, observatories in the region collected luminosity data. Sensors detected a variation that didn't match any known natural behavior. An astronomer commented, puzzled, "This color did not come from the ground. It came from above, but not as high as an aurora." Another team suggested extremely rare auroras caused by charged particles. However, after comparing intensities, they reached a conclusion. The luminous composition doesn't match conventional auroras. Something is missing. The scientists tried adjusting equations, calibrating graphs, reviewing atmospheric models, but every analysis ended with the same sentence written in the preliminary reports. Unusual phenomenon, insufficient parameters. The discussion grew when an amateur observatory released long-exposure photographs taken that night. Instead of showing a uniform red sky, the images revealed irregular patterns, as if invisible lines were organizing the light into different shapes. They were not defined figures, but neither were they random. A physicist on the team summarized the problem. "We have nowhere to put this. It doesn't match anything we know about atmospheric physics." And perhaps the most unsettling point for the scientific community appeared during the analysis of electromagnetic data. At the exact moment of the strongest pulse, there was a sudden drop in electrostatic interference, something that normally happens before energetic events, but with no recorded occurrence on the ground or in space. In other words, the sky turned red and pulsed, but there is no record of what caused it. By the end of the day, while technicians collected more footage and experts gathered on live streams to try to offer explanations, the population already had its own answer, even if science did not yet have one, and it is at this point that the narrative moves forward. The analyses continued for days, but what the sky revealed didn't fit any pattern, and it was in this absence of answers that something even more revealing happened. While specialists still tried to fill gaps in the graphs, the elder Abdul Rahman, sitting in a small room lit by a weak lamp, opened a book that had always been within reach, an old volume full of notes and marks, beside passages he had studied since youth. The yellowed pages seemed more alive that night. He slowly ran his fingers over a line he knew by heart and murmured, "When the sky becomes like stretched fire, it will be a warning for those who still listen." The words echoed through the silence of the house, mixing with distant car noises, and the voices coming from neighbors' open windows, all still talking about the red sky. Abdul looked up and called two young men who had gathered at the door, intrigued by the notebook on his table. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a passage that described unusual changes in the color of the firmament, moments when the sky would become sign and reminder. The young men leaned in and studied the text carefully. None of them spoke for a few seconds, until one of them in a hesitant voice said, "It looks exactly like what we saw yesterday." The elder neither smiled nor dramatized. He simply replied, in a firm and calm tone, "Not everything that is natural stops being a warning, and not everything that is a warning stops being natural." Meanwhile, throughout the entire neighborhood, videos were being re-watched frame by frame. They were compared with the phrases Abdul had repeated over the years. Families who once thought he exaggerated began admitting that the similarity was too uncomfortable to ignore. Messaging groups were flooded with excerpts from the ancient texts. Some said, "It's a coincidence, that's all." Others replied, "But why did it pulse? Why did it change as if it were alive?" And so began the debate that spread across the neighborhood. Coincidence? Extreme natural phenomenon? Or a meeting point between what had always been said and what eyes could now see? Abdul himself, who never forced anyone to believe, remained calm. He simply watched the videos shown by the young men and said, "Do you think this started yesterday?" Truth tends to reveal itself slowly until no one can pretend they didn't see it. The emotional tone was different. People who once mocked the old man now listened in silence, and those who had always respected his warnings felt, for the first time, that the rest of the world was being pushed in the same direction he had pointed to for decades. The discussion went beyond the street. Local blogs began publishing analyses, comparing ancient prophetic descriptions with screenshots of the phenomenon. Some maps showed other red skies recorded in neighboring countries, increasing the unease. And in the midst of that swirl of interpretations, a phrase spoken by the elder began circulating in group chats. If the sky speaks, it is wise to listen. It was at this moment that the revelation stopped being only text. It gained shape, color, movement, and stood before everyone. And while the city tried to process what it meant to see the firmament illuminated that way, a new event was approaching, something that would make the debate shift completely in tone. The discussion was open, but the next sign would leave the population speechless. The next morning began strangely quiet. Children walked to school looking upward, waiting for the sky to repeat the red shade of the night before. Adults, still dizzy from so many theories, gathered on sidewalks, in cafes, and in building entrances. The entire neighborhood seemed divided between curiosity, fear, and absolute denial. On the balcony of Building 14, two neighbors argued, "That was just pollution, like always, nothing extraordinary," Martin said, shaking his newspaper. "But you saw it, didn't you? It looked like it was pulsing, like it was reacting," Gabriel replied, uneasy. At that moment, a group of teenagers crossed the street, laughing loudly. One of them joked, "Red sky? Next sign is a flying dragon for sure." His friend shot back, "Say that, but yesterday you turned pale." The laughter disappeared quickly when they noticed the elder Abdul Rahman walking along the sidewalk, leaning on his dark wooden cane. He greeted each person with a slight nod, as if evaluating not the phenomenon from the night before, but the way people were reacting to it. Some residents approached him. "Do you think that was a warning?" a middle-aged woman asked, looking tired. Abdul did not answer immediately. He looked at the pale blue sky of the following day, and then murmured calmly, "Signs don't shout, they whisper. Whoever doesn't want to hear, simply doesn't." The sentence spread across the sidewalk like wind. Martin, the skeptical neighbor, crossed his arms. "With all due respect, that's just coincidence. Nature does strange things sometimes." The elder faced him with serenity. "And when nature imitates exactly what was described centuries ago, do you still call it coincidence?" The discussion produced an uncomfortable silence. Each person, in their own logic, felt the weight of that night. Some began avoiding the subject. Others didn't want to talk about anything else. In the building courtyard, three young men approached Abdul. One of them, who had laughed earlier, asked, "What do you think comes next?" The old man smiled with tenderness, without theatrics. "I don't come to frighten anyone. I only say that signs are like doors. Either you walk through them with awareness, or pretend you didn't see them." The boys exchanged looks, this time without mockery. They seemed like children standing before a teacher whose truth was impossible to ignore. In the afternoon, the neighborhood WhatsApp groups exploded in debates. Messages arrived non-stop. "My cousin in Chile saw something similar. What if this really is scientific? Do you remember the ancient texts? They look too similar." That was the moment each resident realized something simple, yet decisive. No one could remain neutral anymore. It was each person's test. A silent, intimate test that involved no catastrophe or spectacle, just choice. Abdul Rahman, sitting in the shade of a lemon tree in the courtyard, said to his daughter, who brought him a glass of water, "My child, signs don't change the world. Those who decide what to do with them do." And that sentence became the turning point in the neighborhood. While many pretended everything was normal, others began watching the sky more carefully, not out of superstition, but because something inside them, even if small, had awakened. And as this silent division formed, the firmament prepared a new response, something that would turn doubt into unease and make even the skeptics look upward with their hearts racing. The second night arrived with a cold wind cutting through the narrow streets of the neighborhood, but no one imagined what was about to happen. A little after 10 p.m., as apartment lights went out and the city began to slow down, a subtle glow reappeared on the horizon, almost imperceptible at first, like a blade of light hidden behind the clouds. Gabriel, the neighbor who had insisted something was wrong the day before, was the first to notice. He opened the window to close the curtains and froze at the sight. The sky was turning red again, but it wasn't the same red as the previous night. It was deeper, more uniform, more frightening. He murmured in disbelief, "Again, this can't be." Seconds later, residents began opening windows and doors one by one, as if a silent call had traveled through the neighborhood. Phones vibrated. Messages popped up on screens. The air felt suspended, dense, heavy, as if the entire city were holding its breath. The red spread quickly, covering the entire celestial dome like a veil of fire. It wasn't a sunset, it was deep night. There were no lit clouds, no headlights, no known phenomenon that could justify that continuous glow. The streets fell into such absolute silence that even the animals seemed to understand. Cats curled into the shadows, dogs stopped barking, birds vanished from the sky. In the central courtyard, a large group gathered, elderly people, young adults, children on their parents' shoulders, all staring at the firmament as if searching for answers written there. The red light reflected on their faces, creating tense, frightened, mesmerized expressions. Abdul Rahman was among them, leaning on his cane, motionless. His eyes shone, but not with fear, with recognition. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Tension peaked when, without warning, a white flash sliced across the sky, fast and precise, like a luminous tear cutting through the red. It lasted only a single second, but enough to elicit gasps. A child grabbed her mother's arm. "Mama, ¿qué fue eso?" No one answered. No one dared. The flash disappeared as quickly as it appeared, leaving the red even more intense, as if the sky had absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. For long moments, everyone stood still, waiting for something else to happen. A sound, an explosion, a movement. But nothing came, only silence. An emotional, heavy silence shared by an entire city that, for the first time, couldn't cling to a simple explanation. In the minutes that followed, people began recording, but even the videos seemed unable to capture the true depth of that color. It was as if the lens lost part of the phenomenon. Only one certainty spread among everyone gathered there. What happened that night would not be forgotten any time soon. And as the red lights continued to pulse softly in the darkness, every upward gaze carried the same silent question. If this isn't natural, then what is it? The repercussions began even before dawn. Social media was flooded with videos, testimonies, live streams, and heated debates about the second consecutive red sky. When the sun finally rose, weak and pale, all of Germany was already discussing the event. On the morning news, anchors spoke with a grave tone, something unusual for an atmospheric phenomenon. The national network opened the broadcast with images of the sky recorded from more than 20 different neighborhoods. Each angle showed the same deep, almost uniform red, defying any simple explanation. Meteorologists were invited in a hurry. One of them, visibly uncomfortable, stated on camera, "We are not looking at a late sunset. This was recorded during the early hours. Technically, we don't have a clear cause." Another specialist added, "There are known phenomena like auroras and particle scattering, but none of them match the pattern of this color, this timing, and this intensity." The population reacted in different ways. Skeptics said it was a rare atmospheric coincidence. Others talked about extreme climate shifts. But a significant portion of society, especially religious communities, saw it as a reminder. Islamic centers in Berlin, Hamburg, and Frankfurt held emergency meetings to speak with congregants, many still shaken. There was a sense of collective introspection, as if the sky had opened a window to something greater than any scientific explanation. Videos of the elder Abdul Rahman, recorded by neighbors that night, began circulating. He appeared silent, staring at the phenomenon with a firm, saddened expression, like someone who recognizes an ancient warning. His calm presence became a symbol of balance. Comments multiplied. "This man already knew. He always spoke about these signs. We need to listen to him." Local newspapers tried to interview him, but he politely declined. He said only, "The sky speaks when men forget to look within." That sentence went viral. Thousands shared it. Meanwhile, scientific forums gathered rushed opinions. Some researchers tried fitting the phenomenon into theories about atmospheric dust, heat waves, geomagnetic storms. But all of them had flaws. None explained the repetition, the depth of the color, and especially the flash that crossed the horizon. The government even issued a brief note saying that atmospheric investigations are underway. But no concrete answer came. The topic invaded schools, cafes, work meetings. Psychologists said the phenomenon had triggered a form of collective anxiety, similar to the impact of rare eclipses, only more intense. Religious groups organized reflection gatherings. Christian and Jewish communities also mentioned their texts about changes in the sky as signs of warning. It was as if people of different faiths felt that something had been shown, not just seen. The neighborhood where it all began became a meeting point. People returned to the square where the flash appeared, looking up even during the day, searching for any trace of what they had witnessed. And silently, a deep shift began to grow among the residents. Less arrogance, less mockery, less eagerness to dismiss the spiritual. It was impossible to deny. That red sky had left marks no study could erase. The days following the phenomenon brought no more flashes or red skies. Even so, something profound lingered over the city, not in the sky, but inside the people. It began with the youth, those who once laughed at any mention of the spiritual. Some of them, the same ones who filmed the first red sky while making jokes, now spoke more softly when the topic arose. It wasn't fear, but a new kind of respect. One of them commented on a park bench, "If that wasn't a sign, then what was it?" His friends, once full of mockery, simply nodded in silent agreement. The careless teasing so common among teenagers gave way to an unexpected gentleness in their words. Families also changed habits. In cafes, conversations that once revolved only around work and news began to touch on spiritual themes. Managers asked employees if they had seen the phenomenon. Teachers created debates about the relationship between science, faith, and unusual natural events. Even openly skeptical people began to admit, maybe there are things we don't fully understand. In residential buildings, a curious behavior became routine. At the end of the afternoon, residents would go up to the rooftop just to look at the sky, not out of fear, but reverence. It was as if that intense color had taught everyone to look upward with more attention and less arrogance. During this subtle period of transformation, one figure became a constant presence in the neighborhood's life. The elder, Abdul Rahman. He did not present himself as a teacher or leader. He sat in the same wooden chair by the gate and simply listened. But people came to him one after another, seeking some kind of guidance. One cold afternoon, a young student approached. "Do you really believe that was a warning?" Abdul Rahman answered gently, "Warnings exist to remind, not to frighten." The sky only showed what many were ignoring. The young man remained silent for a few seconds, before thanking him and walking away, thoughtful. This pattern repeated day after day. Men, women, teenagers, and even elderly residents sought out the old man. They were not looking for predictions, but stability, someone who could translate fear into reflection. The change spread into small gestures. Drivers began honking less and arguing less in traffic. Aggressive disputes on public transport dropped. There was an air of collective sobriety, as if the phenomenon had placed everyone face to face with their own finiteness. In religious groups, regardless of faith, the tone was the same. The sky was not just scenery, it was message. Pastors, rabbis, and imams spoke about humility, moral responsibility, and signs that call for introspection. This unusual point of convergence among different traditions created a kind of spiritual truce in the city. Even the media, normally focused on heated debates, temporarily changed the way it approached the topic. Programs began interviewing experts in history, ancient texts, and climate change, trying to understand the collective psychological impact. Some commentators admitted live on air, maybe we underestimated the symbolic dimension of the phenomenon. Meanwhile, videos of the red sky continued circulating, now accompanied by emotional testimonies from those who witnessed it. Comments like, "I'll never look at the sky the same way again," became common. The new emotional atmosphere even reached children, who asked their parents, "Does the sky turn red when God wants to talk to us?" Adults, unable to fully explain, responded with care and tenderness, understanding that any answer would carry formative weight. In the end, the entire neighborhood seemed to move more slowly, not in physical pace, but in emotional depth. People thought before mocking, reflected before dismissing the sacred, listened before laughing. And at the center of all of it, the elder remained there, quiet, serene, observing how a simple change of color in the sky had changed hearts. For many, life returned to normal. But for those who witnessed the red that lit up the early morning, something essential had been transformed, a new respect for the invisible. A silent acknowledgement that there are signs that do not ask for applause, only attention. The sky that night was calm, with no trace of the red that had shaken the city days earlier. Even so, there was something different in the air. It wasn't fear, nor excitement. It was a quiet attentiveness, as if everyone had learned to look upward with more care. Abdul Rahman walked slowly to the same bench where he had witnessed the phenomenon for the first time. The damp sidewalk reflected the yellow glow of the street lamps, creating a soft brightness around him. Berlin's cold wind slid across the elder's face, making his tunic sway gently. He lifted his eyes and observed the firmament, deep, dark, completely calm, an absolute contrast to that crimson sky that had silenced even the skeptics. After a few seconds, he murmured, "When the sky changes its color, it isn't the sky trying to frighten, it's the heart that needs to awaken." The phrase came out as a reminder, not a threat. The people nearby heard him even without fully understanding and stood still, sensing truth in his words. Abdul Rahman continued, still gazing at the sky. "Signs don't come to break the world. They come to illuminate what we insist on ignoring." He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if letting past and present blend within him. The city, large and noisy as it was, seemed to listen along. Finally, he concluded, "The color has faded, but the lesson remains." The camera pulls back slowly. The entire square becomes small beneath the vastness of the sky, which remains silent, yet full of meaning. The city lights shine like tiny points, while the elder sits motionless, serene, a quiet guardian of a sign no one would dare ignore again. The narrator ends. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video to continue reflecting on signs many pretend not to see.